But the key is this. Very few things in your company, the people, your process, your technology is responsible for all the money that you're making. Everything else proceeds to get rid of that money for you.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Today, I'm very excited to have our guest, Bill Canady. He's the author of the 80/20 CEO. And I love this: take command of your business in 100 days. Bill also, this is not common. Matter of fact, well, of course, there's a few people out there, but there's not many. But you're actually the CEO of two different billion-dollar companies, OTC Industrial and Arrowhead Engineered Products. Bill, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Carl, it's really great to be here today. Thank you so much for having me on. And that's a great introduction. Yeah, I don't know how common it is, probably because it takes someone pretty crazy who's willing to do it. So it's not that I'd put myself in the same pantheon as Elon Musk, but because he's got a few more. But I think you got to have a little bit of craziness in you.
Well, and you do got to have a little bit of crazy, but at the same time, every single time I've talked with you, you've been generous with your time. You give this appearance of being very calm, and you generally care about providing a great product. You meaning in terms of podcasts or your book or different things are going out. So let's talk about that, because I'll just be, here I was complaining for a moment about these different little podcasts I was opening up, and you're literally running $2 billion companies. So let's just kind of hit that head on, right? And part of the core of it, and then of course your book, the 80/20 CEO. Let's just, as basics, how are you doing that? How can you actually be the CEO? They say you have to be focused and you have to be doing only one thing. How are you running $2 billion companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. It comes down just to one thing, and it's having a great team around you. And as a CEO, it's kind of, we were talking earlier about your son. I believe you said he's in the academy, right? Military. I'm an ex-Navy guy myself, but I was swabbing floors and chipping paint. Unlike your son's going to be leading men. You got to have a process that you work it with, and if you look at a general or an admiral or whatever your case is, they set the goal. This is where we're going. We're going to take that mountain. We're going to go to this island. We're going to go do whatever it is. The team really has to figure out how to get there. And why that makes it so important is they own it. And once they're on it, and when you have your culture and your tools, your processes, you can run anything because they're out achieving the plan that they've put in. That's the key to the whole thing.
Okay, so let's start with that beginning part. Is one of the most important things you mentioned, which is building that team, right? There's a lot of talented people out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're a team. So how do you create a bunch of extraordinary individuals that are at that $1 billion company level, but get them to be aligned so they're actually properly working together?
You make them part of the process, right? So I'll use an example. It's your first day, you're a new CEO. Let's assume it's an existing company just for the sake of it, right? So there's a lot going on. And typically, if you're a new CEO, there's a lot of things probably going on that shouldn't be, right? There's some reason you're in and the person before you's out, right? So you show up, and when you get there, there's some goal that you're going to have to go achieve. And depending on this, the type of company, whether you're private equity or privately owned or whatever it may be, the goal is going to be driven out of that ownership. And I love private equity. I think it's where you have the quickest and biggest opportunity to make an impact. It's because everyone's aligned, and it's aligned around, we're going to grow this business's earnings, its EBITDA, to a certain level, right? So when you walk in there, you're blessed because you have that in your hand. You already know what the commitment is. You already know, because that company has been bought, it is now owned, and they need to get a return on that investment. So however you feel about that, it gives you great clarity. And so when you walk in, you sit down, day one, it's you and your CFO, hopefully, and you've looked at the number and you understand it. You understand where you are, and you need to understand where you're going. And that number is what you got to go achieve. Now, people may or may not like that number, but it just is, right? You have to decide how much of that's going to be organic and how much you're going to have to go buy, what's going to be inorganic. You walk in, you sit down, you put it out in front of the team. You're going to spend half a day talking to them. They can poke that number, they can talk about it, but the number will not change, right? It is immutable at this point. From there, this is how you get everyone on board. Once they know that this is our number, they're committed to it. The next big step they have to do is tell you, you don't tell them, how their piece of the business they own, how it's going to deliver their portion of that number. That's the strategy to get there. That's how you get them all aligned, because you're all tied to getting to the same goal. You're all tied to getting to that same mountain, that same location. How we're going to get there.
Love that. And so what happens when you have somebody who's not in it? So perhaps it's one of the executives that's from the previous group, meaning they came from within, the private equity bought them. They're used to their style. And just for argument's sake, let's say they've rolled over some of their equity. So they're actually even an equity holder in this company. But they've had their mind of where they think they should be going, but it's not mapping out to get to the outcome of what the private equity is looking for. What have you typically seen to help resolve that conflict best?
Yeah, that happens every time. It's unfortunate. And it turns out the job's just not for them. So they're going to be exiting the business. We typically have that figured out in that first 100 days because we're going to go fast. We want to see a return on our investment in 3 to 5 years. Sooner's better. It takes you about a year to 18 months to go through at least my process as far as getting the business aligned and where it's going. Remember, you're here for some reason, and it's the probably wasn't doing that well before. It could have been doing fine, but let's assume it wasn't doing that well. You still got to achieve that goal. So you're at 50%. We'll just make that up, and you got to get to 100%, whatever 100%, whatever those numbers are. You're only going to get there if you're all aiming at the same goal, and the goal's math. And they go, well, I just don't agree with it. It's too big. It's too small. It's hard. It really doesn't matter, right? This is where we're going. This is where the pot of gold, where the whatever it is that gets you excited is at. They have to plot that course. I'll give you an example, and I love military examples. So, like I said, your son's military. I'm certainly from that. If you think about World War II, and so Truman declared war. Right. Didn't matter if you wanted to be in the war or not, you're in the war. Right. And part of that at the time was, we had issues on two fronts. We had Germany and we had Japan, neither good nor bad, just what we had. MacArthur was in Australia. He was actually in the Philippines, but he went to Australia and he had to put a plan together to get to Japan. Right. So the boss at the time, Roosevelt, later Truman, said, you got to go to Japan. MacArthur had to figure that out. I don't know if you've ever studied it or not, but he had this really innovative thing where he would skip over islands where the enemies were at, right? Where the enemy was at. He figured that out. Truman didn't tell him how to do it. Truman didn't tell MacArthur anything. If you know anything about history, no one told MacArthur anything. He plotted it out. He was responsible for getting there. When that went sideways a few years later, what did Truman do? He fired MacArthur, brought him back home, right? As the CEO, as the person in charge, that's your job. You pick your team. You tell them what the goal is. They have to figure out how to get there. Right? Now, you're part of it. You talk to them. It goes back and forth. But they have to own it because guess what? MacArthur was on the other side of the world. Truman was running the country at the time, right? Roosevelt before him was running the country at the time. It's an input, right? And there's a balancing that keeps the goals aligned. Make sure you know your roles. Make sure whoever your MacArthur is understands that goal and he owns it or she owns it. They have to own it. And if they can't own it, even if it doesn't matter, the job's not for them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. And also that just reality, right? Of there's often, right, as much as a lot of, if you made the founding CEO of a company, or maybe they were the founding, but they were the previous company prior to the next PE, it's just the reality is they often don't last, right? Because they're not able to continue to drive forward with a new direction of the organization. And you're right, if there isn't change in that, it will get slowed down. It'll get bogged down, and people will also go to them still thinking they're still the boss, right? I'm sure you've seen that, right? Where it's like there's somebody still there and they're still going and asking them questions, asking them thoughts. So like, whoa, that's not our direction, right? That's actually in conflict, which is, once again, you said, typically you actually have to make those changes. I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about your book, of course, the 80/20 CEO. Now, that, of course, I love is because it's just born based on the 80/20 principle, if you may. That's, where the concept of Pareto principle. So for those, once again, who aren't familiar with that, who haven't perhaps come across that concept, just high level, what does that mean? And then how should you be typically applying it in your business?
Yeah, so I'll cover it in two areas. One is just through the lens of the book, and then the second one is what is 80/20. So let's start with 80/20. So we all learned about 80/20 in grade school, Pareto, and he was an Italian. He was actually French, and they moved to Italy. And he just observed a lot of things, and he realized that 80% of everything came from 20% of something, right? He noticed the landowners, all the land, 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the people. He noticed that pea pods, 20% of the pea pod bushes, the plants, right, produced 80% of the crop. And it went on and on and on. He studied it, and he had his aha moment. And when he tried it across everything, and it was kind of a universal law that just he happened to recognize it, right? It holds true to our life today, right? I've got probably 50 golf shirts. I bet you I wear this one majority, or something that looks just like it majority of the time, right? It's that we pick the same stuff out of our closets, right? We go to the same restaurants. We do all these types of things because it works for us. And when you have in a business, what you find is 80% of your earnings, 80% of your revenue, 80% of everything comes from just 20% of your customers. Now, that is mathematically absolutely correct. But the reality is always a little bit messy, right? When you run the data, you'll see, well, for us, for whatever reason, 94% of our revenue is coming from 12% of our customers. So it's a theory that once it meets reality, it gets adjusted appropriately. But the key is this: very few things in your company, the people, your process, your technology, is responsible for all the money that you're making. Everything else proceeds to get rid of that money for you, right? The excess customers who are buying products you don't want to sell and they're too difficult to manage. The employees who are working on those aren't contributing. It goes on and on. The beauty about using 80/20, and this is where the book comes in, it gives you a very simplistic process. It's just math that tells you actually where it's at. Now, you don't have to like that. You don't even have to agree with it, but it's math, right? It's irrefutable. This is where it's at. The question becomes, what are you going to do about it?
That is perfect. Great example of what to do. So sometimes that might seem hard for people, right? You have this other 20%, and I'm sure you've heard this more than once beforehand. Well, they could become part of the 80%, right? So meaning it's a non-20% customer, or if you may, it's the 20% of the waste, if you may, or non-value added efforts that's happening in the company. How do you get people to let go?
That's a really great question. And it's probably the number one thing that we all deal with, right? And so the way I handle it, and everyone's got their own way of kind of thinking about it, is we know the obvious stuff. We know our really good customers and we know our really bad customers. And by bad, I mean, they're small, they don't pay their bills, they're a high cost of service, they complain all the time, they order it, it goes on and on and on. And we also know the ones that pay all the bills, right? They're big, right? They buy the products we're really good at. So we can typically agree around those really quickly. It's that squishy middle that we struggle with. So we'll lay it out, and we lay it out in what we call quads, so four boxes. On the top left box, and we put them in a square, is our best customers with our best products. And then we look to them because our best customers also buy products we don't like. And then on our worst customers, by worst customers, we just don't buy enough from us, right? We don't think we make money. We can prove that we don't make money. And they also buy products we like selling, but they buy products we don't like selling. So that lays out our four quadrants: good, okay, good, and bad, right? And once we have that, now begins the discussion. And in that room, I'll just pick on salesmen. I start out as I raise my hand, and they'll go, "You don't understand. This customer," and then they'll tell me why they're special, unique, and different. And they're going to do something really unique and special and different for us. They're just not quite there yet. And so the way I handle it is, because we're human beings, like, all right, let's just set that aside for a moment. First, let's deal with what we know to be factual. And now we're going to bring that customer up. And I say, make your pitch, right? And they tell me, I go, all right, let's try it. But let's put a boundary on it. Because while we're working on this other stuff, how about we give them 30 days? And they go, oh, no, that's not enough time. And how about 2 years? I don't have 2 years, right? My goal, because we will have agreed with the goal, right, already, and so everybody knows that goal, is to get to 100%, and we're going to get there in 3 years. I don't have 2 years to give, right? So can you get them there in 90 days or 6 months or something like that, right? We'll bound it really quickly, and they'll say, absolutely. Into that 6 months, whatever it is, almost for sure nothing's changed. There's a reason that they're not where you want to be. There is a reason. And the typical reason is one of two things. They're already someone else's a customer. They're getting it from somewhere else. They may be Walmart, one of the biggest retailers in the world, but you don't sell Walmart, right? But there's somebody else's a customer for it. So they have the capability. Maybe we just can't get there. Or B, they're coming up with some kind of, I call it rocket ship. They come up with something mystical, magical. It's going to go right to the moon. They just haven't done it yet. Well, if you've seen a lot of startups, it generally doesn't work. So we'll time bound it, and we'll put some requirements around it. We'll come back and we'll look at it, and then they have to go get in line. I'll typically deal with that. This is my own personal thing. I'll deal with that 3 times on an issue. On the third time, I tell the person, this just isn't working, right? It's time for us to move on because we have bigger fish to fry than this thing, right? And then that person has to make a decision, right, of whether this is going to be the thing or not going to be the thing. Because I have 2 things I have to deal with. One is I'm the CEO of this company, and I'm charged with navigating my way to the return that takes care of everyone, right? You want to take care of your employees, your customers, your suppliers, and your investors, right? Exceptional opportunities for your folks. You want to be a good partner to your suppliers and your customers, and you want to give a superior return to your investors. If you don't do all of those, somebody goes home and you're out, right? So I have to do that. At the same time, I have to be a human being and navigate my way through what individual people want. They don't always come together, but I do the best I can to bridge it.
This has been excellent. Let's go into measuring success. So you've outlined it pretty well. You know pretty clearly up front, you're going to measure success based on, at the end of the day, hitting the EBITDA numbers, which is expected based on the investors, right? That's what you've said multiple times. Do you do other things to measure success? And if so, what are they?
We do, but maybe in a slightly different way. So one of the first things we'll do when I come in, and if we're all, the key is to be all aligned around the same goal, right? And typically it's a numerical number. The numbers don't get people too excited to be. It's hard to get impassioned by a cold number, right? It's the other things that go with it. But I will go as fast as I can to get all comp aligned around that same goal. So we buy and sell companies on EBITDA. No matter how you feel about EBITDA, a good measurement or bad measurement. If you listen to Warren Buffett, he tells you it's a terrible number. It doesn't matter to me. It's just the number that companies are bought and sold off of, and many, many times. So that's the number we use. Every executive, every bonus in the company, as fast as I can get, there's going to be paid on that same number, right? The only difference is typically salesmen generally have a commission program versus a bonus program, right? Everyone else is going to, if we have one, that's what it's going to be. So I get us all on the same number, and that solves a lot of issues, right? Then as we start looking at things, we'll typically say, what's our initiatives to go? And it's generally 2 or 3. And those initiatives, like very typical when you come in, just given the situation, it's generally, we got to learn and get 80-20 going, right? And there's a full year of training and everything that happens around that, right? We'll have another initiative. Typically it's pricing at the beginning because it's the one lever we can pull that flows through frictionless. Everything else we do, you lose something along the way. Where purchasing, procurement, you have to do it, absolutely. But that's many times 12 to 18 months or 2 years, depending on the complexity of your products, right? So we'll have a pricing initiative, we'll have an 80-20 initiative, and then we'll have something that is generally very unique to the business. So when I took over Arrowhead, our biggest issues were inventory and facilities. We had too much of both of them. And so that they went hand in hand, right? We couldn't get rid of the building, so we got rid of the inventory. And so we had an initiative around that to save the company, right? And it worked out fantastically because we freed up so much money. At OTC, it was what we called recoverables. It was a term we defined, but we were doing good in certain areas, but we were letting it all leak out from freight and how we were handling stuff. And it was like, so we identified a bunch of recoverables around that, and that was our big thing. That typically you can see it right away in day one. You start measuring those, and all your initiatives that come out of it somehow flow out of that, right? So it's a little training, a little profit, and then what do we think is killing us right this second? It will morph over that first year into something more sophisticated, but you've been here only a minute, right? So you got to get something aligned around that gives you the runway. It's got to be self-funding.
Okay, so now we're going to turn around because I'm curious about your own personal habits. Once again, running $2 billion businesses. How are you managing yourself personally on a day-to-day basis to help make sure you are able to do it, A, and B, so you're maximizing your ability to be effective?
So if you don't make it all about yourself and you're not responsible for delivering all of those things, it actually, you can manage it because you manage your process, right? So I have a couple people around me like you do that help me with my schedules and things like that. And all the scheduling thing, it runs through them. Every time I try to do something with it, it messes it up, right? So they typically are controlling all of that. That's probably the most complex thing. I generally don't even look at my schedule more. I'm scheduled out a year. All the big rocks are a year, rolling 12 months. But my day-to-day stuff, I generally don't look at until I'll look at next week, get an idea of it. Then I'll really kind of, as I get toward the end of the week, because it changes, right? Things come up and go down. And so, like when I buy airline tickets, I just buy 2 one-way tickets because for sure one of them is going to get changed and I'm going to have to go somewhere else. Like, let's see, like on Monday, I am leaving from Sarasota to go to Columbus. Over the last 2 weeks, that ticket has changed at least 5 times from Cleveland was one, or I'm sorry, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus. Those all 3 tickets were bought, all for the same meeting that's moved, and in Charlotte. And so Charlotte got moved today, and it goes on and on and on. So just the scheduling is the hardest part. Everything else, because I run a cadence around specific meetings that I have, and I'm really tied on that. The rest of it just kind of falls in place. So I run a monthly business review with each segment. I have 9 presidents that work for me. They're out running those segments, right? So we'll review it. It's pretty formulaic. They get to do whatever they want with it, and I don't care about the PowerPoints. It's just the initiatives where you are, and I want to see the number. Are you hitting it or not? So you can show up. You can write it on with crayons on the back of an envelope. Fine by me, right? And so we just go through that. And then the second thing we have is we try to have a very forgiving culture. I have this thing called the 4 commandments, right? And I maintain you can run any business with these 4 things. If you just do these 4 things and you require everyone around you to do them, you will be fine. And if you like, I'm happy to tell you what they are.
Yeah, please go through. I'd love it.
All right. So no order, but so the first one is be on pace. Don't be too fast. If you're getting ahead of everyone, they're behind you, you're causing chaos. Don't be too slow. You're talking about before, you're the bottleneck, right? You got to be on the pace that the team is on to achieve the goal. We already know what the goal is because we've all agreed to it, and we already know our timing because we've all agreed to that. Someone will come in and say, "I want to do this." I'll go, "That's 3 years. We're supposed to have this thing done in 3 years." I'll show you something on it. See if you can see on my cell phone. So
558 days there.
558 days, 10 hours, and 20 minutes. That's when we expect to sell OTC. We talk about it on every day. All our town hall has that number on it, and it's as close as we can get it to the right number at the time. Now, look, that's a made up number. We had to pick something, but it keeps us on pace, right? And so someone says, "I want to go do that." I go, I don't have 2 years anymore. I got 558 days, right? You can argue it takes short-term thing. It's not actually not true. It just means, what's our paybacks looking like? Where are we going to invest? Are we on pace? Second one, no surprises. Bad news, relatives, and fish all stink after 3 days, right? We got to share it. We got to know what's going on. Now, you can't kill the messenger, but we've got to know. We got to know as fast as we can. So you can call me 24 hours a day. If I'm busy, I just won't answer, right? But it never bothers me. I try to be respectful with my team. But for me, I just need to know. Shoot me a text, call me, email me. Third one is data driven. And that's the heart of the 80-20 process. Is it's all about data. It's the company's data. It takes all the mystery out. And what we talk about, because we rarely ever have perfect data. If you have less than 20% of the data, you're totally making it up. If you have more than 80% of the data, you're probably so late. Everyone else has already figured it out and moved on. So you have to be somewhere in the middle of that, of using your good sense, intuition, common sense, if you will, which is very uncommon, and the data you have, and make these decisions and go. And you'll get better and better at that. And the final one's the most important, and that is results matter. We will not be a best efforts company. Batting 300 gets you in the Hall of Fame in baseball. Here it gets you fired. We can't win 3 out of 7 times or 10 times. We actually got to win the majority of the time, and we need to make money at doing it. So yeah, results matter. We will not be best effort. So
Bill, that was fantastic. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were just about to say
I'm just saying. So take any situation. Someone comes to you and they go, "Hey, I did all the stuff I was supposed to do, right?" And it's true, they did. They looked at the data, and it failed. What do you think I say? Great, you tried. Let's go next, right? But if they come in and they are too low, too slow, they made it up, they got you. I'm like, that's not acceptable, right? So we use things like progress, not perfection. You can't fall out of a basement. In other words, just go try. It's bad. Try to do something, right? And we use that language and we promote that all the time, right? And we try to be respectful and thoughtful about it. So we try to create the environment where people, it's their strategy. It's not mine. So they can't say your strategy's bad. It's theirs. They told me the time they were going to do it on. We've gone through it. It's like selling a boat, right? You're going to tack into the wind sometime. I know we're tacking because they called me because we have no surprises. I know we're probably a little off course, but we still got the island in sight, right? So it's all going to be fine. Now, get lazy. Don't do your homework. Show up unprepared. It's tough times.
Bill, this has been extraordinary. I hate it. The time constrains us. I love, though, that one comment you made is the three things that smell bad after 3 days. Was it fish, bad news, and relatives? I think that's what it was.
Yeah, fish, relatives, and bad news all stink after 3 days. So just throw a piece of fish on your counter and invite your in-laws over, and you'll quickly discover the truth of that. So,
Bill, how can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
Well, the easiest way is I have a website. It's just my name, BillCanady.com. And you can go there, or you can find me if you Google my name or whatever. Feel free to reach out, call, whatever. Happy to chat with you.
Bill, thank you so much for being a guest on the Measure Success podcast today.
It's my pleasure, Carl. I can't thank you enough for having me. Have a great day now.
And to everyone else who's listening, once again, the reason why we get extraordinary people like Bill to be on the show and provide his insights and expertise is because of you rating the show, downloading. Encourage you also on YouTube to become a subscriber there as well. As we always like to say, wishing you the very best at measuring success. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.